Hello, I'm Richard Ager. Welcome to Week 4 of Capital Outlook. You might also call it Emotional Issues Week. Legislation on abortion, gun rights, and gambling shared the headlines with a dramatic shift in state government as the governor signed a bill to relieve the elected Superintendent of Education, Cindy Hill, of most of her duties. Here's some of the highlights of the week's events.
I had an abortion before it was even legal to have one.
Few issues arouse greater emotions than abortion. For some, it is lingering regret.
I was reading a scripture in Psalms which says, I formed you in the womb, and I started to argue with God because if that was the case, I had committed murder.
For others, defending a painful, personal decision.
Deciding to have an abortion was agonizing. I know that many of you will not understand the decision that I made and may even think me awful for it. But I hope that you can see that I, not any of you, am the person best qualified to make decisions about my life.
Representative Kendell Kroeker's bill states if a fetal heartbeat can be detected.
In my mind, it's pretty clear that that is a human life and it should not be aborted.
But the committee concluded the constitutional issues were too great and killed the bill.
Representative Filer.
No.
Other legislation with dedicated followers fared better, including several gun-related bills. One measure would forbid local governments from establishing gun-free zones, including schools.
I'm trying to stick up for our United States Constitution, and as I stick up for that, my love for hunting, fishing, guns is the Second Amendment.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Matthew Dogali and I represent the National Rifle Association. I would just like to say that we are in full support of both the bill and the amendment.
The discussion about governmental meetings, in particular city council meetings, has been that sometimes those are emotionally charged meetings, and it's felt that the people made the judgment that it's just safer to not have the only firearms in that room be those people who are law enforcement people. So.
Despite those objections, that bill passed, along with another measure to preempt federal law concerning semi-automatic weapons in Wyoming.
If our federal government chooses to commit treason against the people of this country, it's incumbent on the states to hold the federal government in check. It's individual states. States means country. Words mean things.
That last sentiment, in a very different context, is at the heart of the biggest story of the legislative season. Listen to the start of this bill signing.
We may be served with a lawsuit, and I would ask if that's true that we wait until after the ceremony for that to take place so we don't cause a commotion here.
The bill, of course, is Senate File 104, which removes most of the administrative duties of Superintendent of Education Cindy Hill.
I've signed the bill, and I would just say, the last couple of weeks I think have been a tough time for the legislature, certainly a tough time at the Department of Education, a tough time for our office as well. And I have reflected upon this, and a couple things I'd want to point out is we have gotten a number of people corresponding on this who have said that they have very, very strong positions in opposition to this, including their belief that it's unconstitutional, unfair, or both.
Yes, we did serve the governor today. And the governor and I had just the nicest conversation.
Hill is asking for a temporary restraining order while her constitutional case is argued.
This legislation did not come out of public committee hearings held for the benefit of all citizens. It was conceived in the bowels of the Senate, where a few in control reside. This bill demonstrates how power is being accumulated and in the hands of a few. Not all legislators are involved. Some stood up courageously for the people of Wyoming. Others were mere victims of pressure and misinformation. Quite simply, the Constitution is under attack.
Any chance of you settling this, or are you going to see this through right to the end?
Many steps ahead. I would tell you that I tend to be a person who sees things right through to the end.
And here to talk about the week that was, we have Representative Cathy Connolly, member of the House Judiciary Committee and sponsor of the Domestic Partnership Bill we'll get to in a moment, Representative Gingery, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, and Darrell Ehrlick, editor of the Casper Star Tribune. Welcome, all of you. Well, as we just saw Cindy Hill's last word in our piece, I tend to be a person who sees things through to the end. Well, you know, Representative Gingery, this bill did pass in just 12 days, but clearly that's not the end of it.
No, she has filed a lawsuit. Her first hearing is Tuesday at 4 o'clock in Judge Campbell's courtroom, and she's asking for it to be in the bill to be enjoined so that it does not take effect until after the lawsuit's fully done. What it's really down to, and the main argument that her lawsuit's arguing is, the Constitution says the general supervision of public education shall be with the state superintendent of public instruction. The law does go on to say that the legislature can prescribe by law what her duties are. So the question becomes, I think we all agree, the legislature can take duties away from her and add duties. But can you, at what point have you taken away so many duties that now you've nullified or negated the constitutional amendment that says, or the Constitution that says, the general supervision shall be with the superintendent? And I would argue we took so many duties away from her, we only left her with a few. She's in charge of monitoring toxic waste at schools and
Teacher of the Year Award.
Teacher of the Year Award. She can go and read to kindergartners a book or something. So it's more of a ceremonial role. Did the legislature violate the Constitution? And that's going to be resolved.
Well, Representative Connolly, do you think this has legs, this lawsuit?
Absolutely, it has legs. I think we're within our constitutional mandate. I think that the Wyoming Supreme Court has been clear about the general direction of the legislature is the general direction of education is the legislature. It's our responsibility, and we spend hours upon hours debating educational policy. That is our job. And then it's the superintendent's job in the Department of Education to implement it.
You know, Darrell, your paper did, I think, a real good service in publishing a lot of those court documents about the suit that's just been launched. Do you anticipate reporting going on this for a while?
Oh, absolutely. I think what Superintendent Hill said, that she's a person to see it through to the end. You see that right or wrong, she has been a superintendent that is certainly carried out what her, tried to carry out to the best of her ability, that vision. Getting back to your original point, if you look at the documents, the LSO auditors' reports, they are comprehensive and they catalog a number of problems where I agree with Representative Connolly, and I don't know that Representative Gingery would disagree. The legislature's job is education, and when you look at how many problems that those LSO reports found that didn't honor the legislature's intent, I think that was at least problematic. And in fact, it took us 7 or 8 documents to load to our website. There were so many. I mean,
there was an image that struck me. If we could just bring it up on the screen, where all the legislators lined up behind the governor at his news conference were women, and I'm including yourself, of course. Was this a direct sort of visual counterpart to Superintendent Hill's accusations of a good old boy network going after her?
Yes, obviously it was. The superintendent in many of her public comments would talk about a good old boys network operating against her. And in all honesty, I'm a real advocate for getting more women in the legislature. We have one of the fewest percentages of women serving. I'm the only woman who serves on the Education Committee. Representative Throne is the only woman who serves on the Select Committee for Accountability. But this was not a good old boys attempt to supersede Superintendent Hill. In fact, what you see is, I think, a disproportionate number of women in the legislature who are in favor of 104. And so we decided to stand behind the governor. This wasn't good old boys. We're doing the best for education with 104 that we believe.
And certainly that was what was stated all along through the debate over Senate File 104. But nonetheless, given the totality of everything that's been happening this week, do you think, Representative Gingery, that things at the Department of Education are going to be more calm or the opposite?
Well, right now it's a transition period, so there's a lot of turmoil. People don't know which employees are going with Cindy to her new office.
And of course there's an interim director as well.
There's an interim director, so I think there's going to be a little bit of turmoil right now. I mean, they're in the middle of a lawsuit, so So not a lot's happening there. I think what really we have to remember is bad facts sometimes make bad law. So take the personalities out of it. I get it. Cindy rubs people sometimes the wrong way, and so certain people who are empowered got mad at Cindy. Cindy pushed back. Take all that out of it and take the personalities out of it. Think long term. Think of the position, the superintendent of public instruction. What are we doing to that position? Not to, I get it. Everybody wanted to, to beat up Cindy, and they did it. They got her down. They beat her pretty good. But as an institution, the superintendent of public instruction, what are we doing to that institution? We've taken away all the duties of that job in what I see as a violation of the Constitution. To me, I try to say, forget all about Cindy. Focus on the Constitution. Did we do the right thing? Did we negate the Constitution where it says general supervision is with her?
You tried to actually have the legislature foot some of the potential bills that she would face in this lawsuit. Of course, that didn't
and I knew that wouldn't fly. My point was to make the point that this isn't very fair, that what we do is something that potentially is unconstitutional, and then we say to the individual, here an elected state official, hey, and you have to go into your savings and you'll have to spend your own money to actually argue that we violated the Constitution. I don't know if that is how our system should work, that she should have to go into her savings to prove that we violated the Constitution.
Do you detect any constitutional
I think
quandary here?
Well, absolutely. I think Representative Gingery laid it out very well that there is at least some question, but I think that the Supreme Court decision that Representative Connolly, I think, puts it more squarely in the legislature's duty to define the roles. So I think that there's going to, obviously there's going to be a lawsuit. The question that we have, that we've asked before on our pages is what method serves the students of Wyoming the best? And right now that position is political. And education, I've been an education reporter, I've covered higher ed and I've covered public ed. It's incredibly complex, and leading, whether it's a school district or an entire state, is something that I'm not sure that just winning political office is an appropriate qualification.
Well, speaking of winning political office, there's an announcement she would run for governor in 2014. Are you looking forward to an editorial board with
we always welcome conversations. If, as Representative Gingery said, that some people beat her down pretty well. I've always found her to, at some points, give as well as she gets, and I think it will be spirited and robust. What a hypocrite I would be. A robust political dialogue is what newspapers like, and I think what's good for the citizens.
Mm-hmm. But I think that is a good point to think of. What Cindy's really been pushing is local control. What she believes is that education should be at the local level with the school boards, with your local community. The legislature has this belief that everything should be dictated out of Cheyenne, that we're going to have a state-directed education system. And that's the clash, and that's a good, reasonable tension. That's the tension that's been going on, and that's the debate that's been going on. Is education going to be at the local side, or is it going to be dictated all from Cheyenne down to the communities?
I guess I would disagree with kind of just the tone of the dictate. I think it's wonderful that in Wyoming we guarantee each and every student the same, what we call the basket of goods in terms of education. We don't have a system where property taxes dictate whether or not your kid goes to a good school or a not so good school.
No longer, right.
That exists almost everywhere else in the nation. And so I wouldn't call it dictates in that kind of way. I would call it opportunity, an equal opportunity for all of our kids.
Go ahead.
And I just would like to back up. The beginning part of your question to Chairman Gingery was about what do you think the state of education is right now, and your original comment was about turmoil. And I'd like to say, as someone who just sat in an education meeting where we were actually talking about policy, and there were WDE employees there who are responsible for the implementation of that policy and came into that committee meeting with information. They were sitting at the table with us talking about accountability and assessment. And I, for one, sat back and said, okay, from the get-go, we're able to do our job now. And
so in spite of the turmoil, you do think that things are actually on a firmer, better footing right now?
Almost immediately.
But
okay.
I've got just one question. You know, with all the mandates that are coming from the Federal Department of Education, and then we want to look at test scores, mandated test scores, adequate yearly progress, how do you maintain, from a legislative perspective, local control, that idea of local control, while still getting a uniform product? Where do you strike that balance?
I think Chairman Gingery's point, it's absolutely correct. How do we do that? And that's a tension. And we do want adequate yearly progress. We want kids in Wyoming to know the same things in math or in language arts as kids in Colorado or New York.
And we are destined to revisit all of this, I'm sure, very soon. But, you know, as we noted earlier, this was, of course, the week for so-called social issues, a conscious choice by the Speaker. For example, a bill banning abortion after a fetal heartbeat is detected went through a very emotional hearing but died. What came to my mind, well, first, it had some language problems. It was missing the usual exemptions for mother's health and rape, incest, etc. But here we are, we're on the heels of the 40th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. And as you look around, there's contrary things going on. A recent Pew Research poll found just about 2/3 of Americans firmly opposed to repeal. But also, since just 2010, Republican legislators have passed more than 130 bills to limit various aspects of access to abortion. So I'm wondering, what's your take on where we're at here in Wyoming? Because this is actually one of the states where many women are more than 150 miles from the nearest abortion clinic.
You know, in some way, I find that very regrettable. I think access to abortion is part of reproductive health, and it is regrettable that women need to travel in that kind of way, and therefore we need to be really careful that we don't limit it even further. And so any kinds of attempts at kind of notification, waiting periods are going to hurt women in Wyoming, even more so than elsewhere in the nation. And so we need to be really careful to make sure that we have adequate health care, including reproductive health care.
Do you get that sense of sort of a chip it away bit by bit rather than, you know, the grand scheme of overturning the entire thing at the Supreme Court level?
The Wyoming legislature has been interesting when it comes to abortion. We don't pass any bills dealing with it. They come every year. I mean, I've been here almost 10 years. Every year there's an abortion bill, and they're never successful. And, you know, Kendell Kroeker brought a bill that was a direct challenge to Roe v. Wade. That went down. But over in the Senate, Senator Nutting has brought back a bill that I bet you we've seen every year for 10 years. And it's a bill that requires 24-hour notice, I think parental notification, just a lot of things that you've seen in other Republican states. For whatever reason, this state, and I think it's more of the libertarian type bent that we have here, those bills just don't get passed. People, you have a lot of legislators that are pro-life, but then they vote against those bills because they say, not our business. And I just think it's been a consistent over the last 10 years. That's what you've seen with most of the abortion bills.
Is that your sense of
absolutely.
the public mood?
I think that in the grand scheme of things, they're very emotional. We saw that on the tape. But that seems to be about as far as it goes.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was, to another topic, a big crowd of gun supporters in the Capitol for a number of bills, actually, which you got to hear at your committee. Concealed weapons in schools and town council meetings, but not in courtrooms. How did that all sort out?
You know, we have about 6 or 7 different gun bills going on, and each one is very different. I mean, the one that I'm really pushing that I have a lot of support for is providing funding for school resource officers, and that's actually something the president even suggested in his statements, that school resource officers, we should provide incentives for schools to do that. And that's
just to be clear, that would be a policeman.
It's a policeman that is more than just security. It's someone who's in the school helping kids. They come into kindergarten classes and teaches on stranger danger. In the middle school, they might teach about drug education. They're there to help victims. They're there to investigate crimes. And the school resource officer works within the school system, and they're usually from the sheriff's department or from the police department. That's a bill that has a lot of support, and a lot of people see that.
Now, I read in one of the newspapers that you actually had a personal experience that, you know, could easily influence your decision because you were confronted by somebody who had a weapon.
I was, and that person went to prison, and so before that I had never...
But this was in your official office.
Yeah, and before that I had never really been around guns, and after that I do carry a weapon for self-defense, and that has, you know, sort of influenced some of my decision-making as to some of these bills. That one of the arguments that you continually hear with is restricting access to some areas but allowing access to others. And when you're using, if you are trying to use a firearm as self-defense, and you're out actually having to remember, oh, I can't go into this place, but I can go into this place, and I can't go into there. And a lot of times the places you can't go into are the places you may actually be confronting the person or the people that, you know, may be posing a danger to you. So what we're trying to do with a lot of these bills, and it's really fluid right now, and I don't think we're quite there yet, and so we're trying to do a bunch of amendments, is trying to have an orderly system so that we know there's certain places we all
make it more
agree.
predictable, let's Senator here. I just want to say we only have about 5 minutes left. A few things I wanted to get to because Representative Connolly, there was a House Bill 104 by its number that would preempt federal law concerning semi-automatic weapons in Wyoming. That passed 8-1, but of course you were the dissenting vote. What's your objection?
That bill
where would you like to start?
Where would I like to start? We could start with the U.S. Constitution.
And the Wyoming Constitution?
We have a Wyoming Constitution, we have a U.S. Constitution, and it's clear that federal law...
I'd like to read it right there.
Right here, I could read it. The state of Wyoming is an inseparable part of the federal union, and the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land.
Well done.
Okay. I love our Constitution, and I love that element of our Constitution as well. And what 104 does is preempt this article. And more importantly, it says to our neighbors, our friends and neighbors and our federal law enforcement in our state that we're going to arrest you for doing your job. That's just ridiculous.
Well, it caught the attention of the Huffington Post, among other things, but, you know, Representative Gingery, I got to ask, you know, you voted for it. Is this just feel-good legislation? Because you're saying state law would supersede federal law.
We actually passed the same bill 2 years ago in regards to manufacture of guns, so it's actually already on the books. All that Representative Kroeker was adding was the ownership was being added. And
you go after federal agents,
too. That's a biggie.
But it's manufacturing, he's adding owned in. The big part is that nullification has been seen in multiple states. Wisconsin did it with the Fugitive Slave Act. When the federal government said, you shall return slaves, Wisconsin said, no, we're not going to do that. It's a statement more by the state government that you're not going to do something.
Do I sense an editorial coming?
Well, we've editorialized. Okay. We think it's we think that these are not the proper way to go about it, and we question if it were ever challenged whether it would stand, and then how much time and resources do you dedicate to something like this?
Well, 3 minutes left, and you know there were a number of gender discrimination bills before the legislature. Gay marriage bill, which you sponsored, was defeated, as was the domestic partnership bill, and this, of course, at a time when more and more states are actually legalizing same-sex marriage. What's your take on this? Is this a setback?
Well, I'll give you the line that I'm getting from all of the supporters, and that they're encouraging me to think of the bills moving out of committee, getting to floor votes, getting to relatively close floor votes as something to be really...
So getting closer and closer.
Closer and closer as necessary steps, and amazingly good steps. You know, admittedly, I'm personally really disappointed. I thought that this was the year that they'd be passed.
Well, what made the swing votes that you perceived swing the wrong way for you?
Oh, that's a good question. You know, we're getting a lot of feedback that people wonder how constituents feel in particular districts about being able to go home and talk to their constituents.
Do you think outside criticism of Wyoming by gay activists may have hurt your cause?
I'm not sure I agree with you that there's outside criticism of Wyoming. You know, certainly we have our history of the murder of Matthew Shepard, and that always seems to taint kind of conversation that happens. But on the other hand, I think that people from the outside are looking to Wyoming as perhaps a kind of a bastion of sensibility when it comes to these kinds of issues.
I know there's lots to say about this. You, in fact, have an anti-discrimination bill, you know, yourself. We have very little time left, and one thing I wanted to get to, House Bill 130, which is teaching Bible studies in public schools, that is now moving on, I believe, to the Senate, so it's been approved by the House. Explain, please.
And I thought actually Representative Connolly explained it very well on the floor the other day, that it's already allowed to be done in the schools, and I think what their attempt was to codify that into statute. Now, Representative Connolly, you were arguing that they don't need to codify it if you can already do it. So I'm not sure if it was that big of a bill, other than, I mean, this is what the people that brought the bill, I can't remember who sponsored it actually. They said that what they were doing was codifying what was already allowed. And that's how I understood it.
Right. School districts can teach, and they do, Bible as literature, comparative religion. We do not need to be putting into our statutes information about a particular class. What's next? Calculus?
Well, it would be either Old Testament or New Testament, but I'm afraid we're pretty much out of time, and we didn't get to the fact that the lottery bill now may have a chance as it moves along. So that is, as I said, the time that we have. Our thanks to Representative Cathy Connolly, Representative Keith Gingery, and Darrell Ehrlick. And we will see you next week on Capitol Outlook.